The four candidates in the running to become Liberal leader took the debate stage for the final time last night.
Against
Over
yourself.
2 hours, they laid out how they'd
why
fight back
is
against
President
U.S. tariffs, strengthen the economy, and differentiate themselves from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
Very proud of the record that we have. We've made some mistakes, absolutely. Nobody is perfect, but we've done a lot of good things for this country, and I think we need to build on that success.
I've not been a minister with Mr. Trudeau's government, nor have I been an economic advisor. I'll be focused much more on the economy. I'll be focused on creating wealth. I'll be focused on getting more money into Canadians' pockets. That's what I'm good at.
This campaign has been a personal liberation. I personally do not believe in a style of leadership, which is a one-man band. I think that the best kind of leadership is collaborative and listening.
I'm much more hands-on, much more of a hands-on person, hands-on manager. I focus on results and getting things done. I'm fortunate to have support in the caucus. I hear directly from the supporters about more regular and two-way dialogue with the caucus.
Voting has now officially started for the Liberal leadership, and the party will announce the winner on March 9th at an event here in Ottawa. Let's bring in the power panel to talk about last night's debate. Rob Benzie is the Queen's Park bureau chief for the Toronto Star, who somehow has time in the middle of this Ontario election. Jonathan Baylis is a former Quebec advisor to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Rachel Siegel is a former director of policy in the Stephen Harper government and co-host of the Beyond a Ballot podcast. And here with me is Jordan Leichnitz, a former NDP strategist. Okay, I'm choking here. Just give me a second. Look, I want to talk about the big polling changes, and I want to talk about Mark Carney and Brookfield in the next segment. But right now, I just want to focus on what we saw last night, if that's okay. So, Jonathan, let's start with you. You were with us throughout the French language debate here on CBC News Network. What did you see in the English debate last night? Do you think it will make any kind of a difference in a race that looks like Mark Carney is the clear front runner to win?
I don't think it'll make any difference at all. I think it was more enjoyable to listen to the English debate than the French debate, simply because they were in their first language. It flowed better. It was smoother. I think they got their points out clearer. It's not a surprise. It's what we expect. But, you know, let's look at political debates just in this country. How often do you really see knockout punches, which, you know, determine the next election or the next leadership? You know, Jack Layton had a good appearance on Tout le monde en parle. That wasn't even a debate. Andrew Scheer, you know, in 2019 had a bad moment in a French debate on abortion. That may have cost him. So sometimes there's a knockout punch against yourself. But most debates, if you think about them, are not memorable. We don't really remember them. And so I don't think that this is going to stand out. It's definitely not the most exciting debate that we've ever had in Canadian history. So if that's the case, I think that the front runner probably remains the front runner. Again, we don't know who these 400,000 voters are, and it's very hard to get, you know, a feel for it. But we certainly can sense the momentum, the donors, the you know, the amount of people, the amount of dollars that have gone in, the caucus members. Yes, there's momentum for Mark Carney. I think that that's where it's headed, and I don't think anything changed in the last two nights. Okay,
yeah, look, Rachel, I would normally agree with Jono that often these debates don't change things dramatically, but then I saw Donald Trump and Joe Biden debate, and, well, you know, everything changed kind of then. So, I mean, well, what's your view of it as a conservative, watching four Liberals mostly agree with each other?
Yeah, exactly. My point was going to be that this wasn't really a debate. It was more of a conversation. And Jono talked about enjoying it. I mean, I don't know who enjoyed that, because it was really just four people having a nice chat about their ideas for this party. The one distinction I will make from Jonathan's point is that I think this debate was more consequential than he's giving it credit, that he's giving credit to it. And that is because not only were Liberals watching last night, but I think a lot of Canadians tuned in to see just how Mark Carney would perform, and whether or not he is somebody in a general election that would want that they would want to vote for. Ultimately, you know, I'm going to argue that Pierre Poilievre, Yves Blanchet are much stronger debaters than Mark Carney. I would have liked to see him actually debate last night, but ultimately, I think that Carney really had to prove to Canadians in this debate that he was the one for them, that he was a sure thing, the way that it seems like he has for Liberals. So ultimately, I think he didn't do as well as he probably could have, not in terms of this leadership race, but a general election.
Right. No, I see your point. And Jordan, I'm always cautious, right? There's the way television hosts and pundits watch debates, and then there's how normal undecided voters watch these things, right? We get very caught up in
Very much.
style and pizzazz, and others, they have a more gut level reaction, or they like the details. So I don't know how people are reacting to this. What's your sense of it?
Well, I talked to my parents today, who are, not dyed-in-the-wool Liberal voters, but watched the debate, and they came away with really their impression was, wow, these are four competent people having like a reasonable discussion about the future of the country. So I think that, for a lot of people at that level, the takeaway was probably good. The question that I would have, though, and this maybe goes to the importance of debates and why they matter, is was that debate really testing Carney? Because we have a foregone conclusion now for this leadership race, but I'm not sure he's actually really being meaningfully put through his paces. And I think that we did see snippets there of things that could be pretty big vulnerabilities for him. And, I think I'm sort of with you in that I thought Gould had a really good night. She was a very clear communicator. And one of the points that she was making was that the Liberals need to reach out to Canadians as speaking like regular people in language and with experiences that connect to the struggles Canadians are having. And Mark Carney's out there talking about grocery prices as the consumer price index and, catalyzing
food
productivity
basket,
and
is
food
what he
basket.
called it, yeah.
And so I think he's still struggling to do that. He's got this crash course that he's on right now about retail politics, and it's clear that he's still very much in the bubble in how he's thinking and talking. And you could see him being very competent and credible at the front of a boardroom, but I wonder how that's going to translate out in the community and out actually talking to Canadians.
Yeah, I wonder about that too, Benzie, because I see you nodding your head as Jordan makes her point. And just the way things are shifting in the country, I don't know where Canadians' headspace is at. And we'll show the numbers in the second segment, but are people just looking for steady and competent? Do they care as much about retail politics right now? Do they want charisma, or do they want reassurance? How do you view how this is playing?
I think David, that Jordan's bang on. I don't think he's been tested yet, Mr. Carney.
Yeah.
And he's shown himself to be pretty thin-skinned in dealing with reporters. Rosie Barton had him on her show for an accountability interview, and I thought he looked a little chippy in that one. And he hasn't done very many others. But I watched last night very closely, and I also watched the French debate. And John was right. It was much more enjoyable to watch in their native tongue, because it was just the French language debate was difficult even for an Anglophone like me in Toronto watching. But I thought the most telling moment of the whole debate was when our friend Hannah Thibodeau, at the end of the debate, and Hannah did a terrific job moderating, at the end of the debate circled back to what makes you different, what differentiates you from Justin Trudeau, which is the ballot question. And Carney, I thought, hit that one out of the park. Freeland had a good response, but she kept ducking it at first, and same with Karina Gould. And I thought, this is the ballot question, folks. The Liberals needed to lance the boil to get rid of Justin Trudeau so that they could be competitive again. David, you and I have talked about this numerous times since the June 24th by-election here in Toronto St. Paul's, where they lost to the Conservatives. They lost a safe Liberal seat. That was the beginning of the end for Mr. Trudeau, even though you could argue it was probably even before that, when the Bank of Canada was raising interest rates. I thought that Carney was the only candidate who distilled that change you can trust, or whatever the Liberal slogan will be in the election, that I expect to be called very, very soon. If Mr. Carney is smart, he would call it right away, because I wouldn't wait for the Conservatives to beat him up.
Yeah, whatever momentum you have, you want to capitalize on it. You want to put a lid on the big war chest of the Conservatives. So look, I do want to just roll into the other components of this conversation, because the Liberal leadership race, and particularly the current candidacy of Mark Carney, it's shaken up the voting intentions of Canadians. I mean, look, clearly Donald Trump is also playing a big role in this, but polls this week from Ipsos, Ecos, and Leger show the Liberals either lead or are neck and neck with the Conservatives, all within the margin of error. And when Leger asked people how they would vote if Carney was leader, the Liberals come out on top with 40%. 40 for the Liberals, also within the margin of error. It is a stunning change in the political dynamic. But as Carney surges, the attacks and the scrutiny intensify. The opposition Conservatives say Carney is lying about his role in the relocation of Brookfield Assets Management from Toronto to New York.
Last night, Mark Carney lied to Canadians. Donald Trump asked companies to move to the United States. And what was the response from Mark Carney? It was to immediately support and to his board unanimously voting to move their headquarters from Canada to New York City, not standing up to Donald Trump, not protecting Canadian interests, Canadian investment, Canadian jobs, not even modeling good behavior.
Now, Carney was the chair of Brookfield Assets Management until he resigned to seek the Liberal leadership. And last night, Carney insisted the relocation was approved after he left the company.
I was chair of Brookfield Asset Management. I ceased to be chair on the 15th, I think, of January, when I announced for leadership. The decision, the formal decision of the board, happened after I ceased to be on the board. I do not have a connection with Brookfield Asset Management. No longer have a role, obviously, as I resigned in the middle of January.
But the timeline and the paper trail show that Carney played a key role in the relocation in the months leading up to his jump to politics. Now, Carney's campaign has released a statement saying Pierre Poilievre is scared of running against Mark Carney, and he's desperate to misrepresent Mark's serious experience in business because he has no economic experience. Brookfield Assets Management remains one of the largest investors in Canada. It continues to list on the Toronto Stock Exchange, and its parent company, Brookfield Corp, continues to be headquartered in Toronto. Okay, so Jono, a couple of things there. You see the positive effect that Carney has had in public opinion, and then you see this vulnerability because it's unclear to me the negative consequences of the Brookfield relocation. They're there because they want access to U.S. shareholders and U.S. stock indexes. It's unclear if there's job losses or tax losses to Canada. But the way he answered that question, his fingerprints were all over the move, and he answered in a way that he tried to distance himself from it. So is that dishonesty? Is that political inexperience? What is it? Jonathan, help me understand that one.
I suspect they're going to explain or clarify in the next few days and try to move on from this because you don't want it to linger. But whatever the answer is, the Conservatives are going to come back with this or 5 other things. Yes, they've been gathering intel on him for ages. They're probably digging even faster and farther in the last month or so. But they are in full panic meltdown mode. I mean, I don't believe these numbers are as wonderful as they are. I'm way more cautious about these things. I think that, if it can change in 5 weeks like this, then it can change back in 5 weeks. So everybody should take a big, deep breath. But if I were sitting there in the OLO, in the Conservative war room, I would be in complete crisis meltdown mode because this was not the plan. This was not even a possibility. This was, where they're going to get a majority or 225 seats. Was the Liberal Party going to be the 4th party? Was the Liberal Party even your opponent? So they're going to keep throwing things at the wall, hoping one of them sticks. And I don't know if they are. If this momentum is real, and again, I'm very cautious about it. I think there'll be bumps in the road and they'll have to handle them. And so far, I'm not sure if he's capable of handling them well. But so far, it's going to be like a Teflon Don if it continues the way it's going. So he should be prepared to answer these things, move on, and keep his core message about why he's best placed to lead Canada going forward.
Look, and for the record, we tried to get Mr. Carney to come on the show tonight to talk about this. He declined. All we got was that statement there. But, Rachel, Brookfield Assets Management probably would have had to do this move whether Kamala Harris had won that election, because if you want this growth plan they have laid out, you need to be headquartered in America to get access to the things they want to get access to. So I don't know if the Donald Trump thing is there. The comms thing is an interesting thing. I mean, what do you make of the way he tried to distance himself from it? Because if it is standard business practice, as some experts say, what's the problem? Why not just say that?
Yeah, well, David, the only people panicking are the Liberals after Mark Carney was caught in this lie last night saying that he had nothing to do with it. But this is the second time that we've seen Mark Carney come out and make a claim. First, that isn't true. The first was that he wasn't involved with the Trudeau government, and we know that he's acted as an advisor for many years. And now we see him claiming and distancing himself from this decision of Brookfield management. So the number one lesson that we learn in political communications is that if you're explaining, you're losing. And in this case, he now has to come out and explain why there is a differentiation between his side of the story and the story that the Conservatives present presented this morning. When you're days away from a leadership race and potentially a couple of weeks away from a general election, as we're hearing, that's not really where he wants to be spending his time, nor should he. So to answer your point, it's a little bit of column A and column B. Political inexperience is definitely playing in here. But in terms of the polls, I do also want to recognize the role of the NDP. It was nice to see Jagmeet Singh out today and making any kind of point, because when we look at the polls, what we're seeing is the Conservatives are actually holding on to a lot of their numbers. Jagmeet Singh and the NDP have gone down, and that's what's playing into this polling. And so again, to Jono's point, nobody is panicking on the Conservative side. The Conservatives have a message for Canadians that we've seen that has permeated the Canadian narrative. The Liberals are trying to say that Canada is not broken, and there are a lot of Canadians that can be both patriotic and believe that Canada is broken and needs to be fixed. And that's what the Conservatives are planning on pushing their message.
You're right. It's NDP and Bloc voters, Jordan, that are going to the Liberals. But the Conservatives may not be panicking, Rachel. But Jordan, we know that if the Liberals and the Conservatives are tied, the vote efficiency tends to really favor the Liberals, right, in terms of seat count. So that is worrying. And some Conservative MPs were acknowledging that to me in conversations today. I mean, how do you see what's happening? Despite these deficiencies, there is this move to Carney that seems to be happening.
Sure, and I appreciate Rachel's enthusiasm and concern for the NDP. It's warmly
it's heartfelt.
It's heartfelt. Look, I mean, I think that it's very clear that for both the NDP and the Conservatives, the kind of campaign that they're going to have is different from the campaign that they were planning for even 4 months ago. That is a reality. Now, as for where the polls are at right now, this is likely the high point, I think, of Carney's popularity. It's the idea of Carney. It's the idea of change. We still haven't seen very much of him. And the Conservatives haven't had a chance to get their machine in terms of negative advertising into him. So I would expect to see those numbers come down. And the other thing I would say about the NDP numbers and new Liberal leaders is that we have seen this movie in the past. And, you know, you can look back even as far back as Stéphane Dion. Overnight, the NDP lost 5 points, was down to 10%. Yeah. And that didn't end up going so well. And just a few years later, they were in official opposition. So this is, I think, a bounce. It's normal to have a halo effect, especially when there's been such an unpopular leader that has just departed. And so I would expect to see that kind of a move in the polls right now, but that doesn't mean that it's going to sustain.
So, Benzie, I would normally agree with all of this rational analysis, except for one big caveat. Donald Trump has entered the chat, and that changes everything. It absolutely changes everything, because, you know, Fred Delory, who's on the show every Friday, kept saying the jumps in the polls, there's a dead cat bounce. There aren't enough cats in Canada to account for all the dead cat bounces that you're seeing to close a 27-point gap. And it's all Trump. And people are just looking at everybody compared to the president, not to each other. So how do you see it?
Well, David, I pushed back on what Rachel said about panicking. I was at a luncheon yesterday at the Albany Club here in Toronto, the bastion of Toronto Tories, not necessarily Western Reform Tories, but certainly traditional progressive conservatives federally and provincially. And there is some concern of that Mr. Poilievre may be blowing this massive lead. And it's interesting because those Bay Street Tories kind of like a guy like Mark Carney, who is their kind of people, and that may be problematic for Mr. Carney as he tries to appeal to progressive voters, because he is much more to the right of Justin Trudeau. And I thought that some of what he said last night in the scrum, especially, suggests that he is not a Trudeau liberal necessarily. Now, Poilievre wants to paint him as carbon tax Carney, and that may be fair. I'm just not sure that that's going to be as sticky anymore, because at the end of the day, I don't think Canadians were mad at Justin Trudeau because of just the carbon tax. They were mad at Justin Trudeau because Pierre Poilievre very successfully whipped up anger toward him. After 9 years, you get sick of anybody. It doesn't matter who the prime minister is. Brian Mulroney found that. Stephen Harper found that. It's just after that long, it's hard for you to still have mass appeal. And I think that's the problem. I mean, it is amazing to me that the Liberals are in the game still. I mean, I agree with Jono. I wouldn't be counting my chickens before they're hatched, because I still think that all history favors the Conservatives, just because the time for a change number is so high. But The folks at the Albany Club were saying that Carney has certainly changed the game, and they won't be surprised. Some of them I talked to, Tories, won't be surprised if Poilievre blows this lead, which is a stunner. I wouldn't have foreseen that even 6 months ago.
Well, I don't know what the margin of error, Jonathan, is on a verbal poll at the Albany Club, but it's probably a little bit higher. You know, but to Jordan's point, this might very well be the high watermark, right? Because a lot of this polling is prior to the debate, but Pierre Poilievre slayed the dragon in a story a little bit too early, it seems, and I wonder if that is it's less him blowing it so much as everything else coalescing around whoever would lead the Liberals. You know what I mean? I don't think Poilievre has lost his support. It's just all the other disparate support seems to be gathering in one place.
This is very much timing and opportunity. And, you've mentioned it. It's Donald Trump, Donald Trump. Let's see what happens next week. I don't know if next week is now the deadline or not. And
it's very unclear. It's very unclear.
I'm certainly not going to try to read his mind. No. But listen, for the last 2 to 3 years, what was driving voters, what was at least in polls, but you would have thought that's the ballot box question, was anger, was frustration, cost of living, interest rates, everything. But it was frustration and anger. And Pierre Poilievre very masterfully, took all that energy and he turned it into something, a 27-point lead. Now, the question is, are people still angry, or is the number one emotion that's going to drive them fear? And if it's fear, is Mark Carney the answer, the person who's going to make them feel a little better, a little less scared, maybe can handle the situation? That's what this is going to come down to. We can have debates, and we can have knockout rounds in a French debate between Blanchet and Poilievre and Carney. And if Carney just comes out as the mature adult, and that's what people are looking for, that may be enough. That may be the change factor people want.
Okay, I got about 60 seconds left. I do want to hear from Rachel and Jordan if I can on this. I just wonder, someone suggested this to me earlier today, is a very smart person, that there would be a slingshot effect to the populism of Trump. That people would see populism in its apex form and maybe recoil away from that and, maybe look for something, quite frankly, Rachel, a bit like Stephen Harper in 2006, a steadier, lower key kind of guy, which Mr. Carney would kind of be. I mean, is that a potential phenomenon at play here? Rachel, your thoughts?
Of course, Donald Trump plays into the equation. And the one thing that has me feeling okay about everything is the fact that the Conservatives historically have been so strong in messaging and repositioning. And so, like we talked about before with the polls, this is not about Pierre not doing something right. This is about everybody around Donald Trump, the Liberal leadership, having an effect on those polls. So when we talk about messaging, I know that the Conservatives are still going to be speaking to those people that are standing in food bank lineups. They are going to be speaking to the people that can't afford homes in Canada. What did we hear last night? Mark Carney addressed Canadians as unproductive. We've heard that Canada is not broken. That's not the reality for a lot of Canadians. And I think that although, this is a nice reprieve from the messaging around Justin Trudeau, there still is a lot of anger when it comes to the affordability crisis, when it comes to people's ability to live in this country, that Pierre Poilievre has really honed in on that message and will continue to earn Canadians' trust that he's the one to fix it.
Well, look, to be fair to Mr. Carney, I think he said the Canadian economy has a productivity challenge, not that Canadians individually are unproductive, right? I mean, which is, a true statement.
It was the wrong message. It was the wrong message at this time.
Yeah, and the way he framed it made it sound like he was calling Canadians unproductive, which is your point, right? That he kind of messed up the wording there. Jordan, last word to you on that.
I think it's unlikely that Canadians are going to yearn for a technocratic solution to the problems that they're facing right now. And I think that's really the challenge at the heart of Carney's candidacy. He is very competent. He's a very smart guy. He's also a guy who talks like a Brookfield management consultant. And we're in a political time right now where that's not what is punching through. That's not what is connecting to people. And people are looking for other things. And so I think that there can be populism certainly on the right, and we've seen that from Poilievre. There can also be populism on the left. And he is opening, as Robert Benzie was talking about, he's opening a flank also on the left there. So I could see him having trouble holding that vote coalition together as time moves forward and we get into some of these more heated discussions where he is tested with some tougher opponents.
Yeah, the leftist populism, look at what's happening with Bernie Sanders, the only Democrat you're hearing from right now in the United States. He's sort of moving into that. Okay, Jordan Leichnitz, Jonathan Kalis, Rachel Siegel, Rob Benzie, thank you so much.